Okay, let's start in time and maybe finish in time. That would be a good thing. And I know that I'm the only one currently between you and maybe the departure. So first of all, thanks for being here. I'm happy that so many people made it to the room. Actually, I was expecting much less. So thank you very much in advance. I'm Stefan Wagenpfeil, professor for software engineering from a small town called Göttingen in Germany. And I also work with the European Union in a group called the AR/VR Coalition, which is a bunch of people discussing upcoming technologies, advising or analyzing techniques that should be responsible for the for the regulatory process in the European Union. And today we're talking about digital identities in the metaverse and virtual worlds. And why is this important? Compared to all the other stuff we heard this week, this is kind of exotic. I'm aware of that. And the metaverse and virtual worlds as such are exotic. They are things that are not so clearly defined. There are many terms, there are many streams currently. We have the gaming industry, which is quite big in there. We have vendors like Meta, which are doing their own metaverse. But on the other hand, we have a bunch of virtual worlds. We have Web3 techniques, we have browser-based interactions, we have collaboration systems like, for example, Microsoft Teams, which is also a virtual world and a virtual solution. And in all of this, identification, authorization, and authentication are three major important points. Because without that, it's difficult to build any application in this area. Here we see the bandwidth of what is called metaverse or virtual worlds. On the one hand side, quite left, we have humans, us, entering virtual worlds. But the far we come to the right, the more it gets digital. Here we have digital twins of machines, for example. And in all this range, identification, authentication, authorization is important. Let's make some examples. In the middle, you see those typical virtual worlds. Maybe you know them from gaming, maybe you know them from presentations of Meta, of Microsoft as well. And in such a virtual world, we have avatars. Not even human-like looking. That an avatar can be anything. It can be some kangaroo jumping around. And what happens if a kangaroo wants to do a transaction with a koala bear? How do you identify that? How can they authenticate each other? Because such transactions, even being in virtual worlds, can have to do with real money. We have virtual worlds like the Metaverse from Meta, where you have publish-subscribe models, where you have producer-consumer models, where you have buyer and seller models. I can buy things in games, armor, weapons, or whatever. I get rewards in games. I, as Stefan, get them. Not my kangaroo avatar, or maybe also he. We don't know, we will figure out what to do with that. But this is a problem in such virtual worlds. Because if you enter such a world, nothing we know from the real world is valid anymore. It's very easy to fake identities and authentication in virtual worlds. As I said, an avatar can look like anything. So this is the more or less interaction-based virtual world. On the right-hand side, we see something completely different. That's called the industrial metaverse. The industrial metaverse is based actually on digital twins of machines, of factories, of tools, of real-world objects that are used or that can be used to simulate real-world behavior. Why is this important? Let's take this picture here. What we see, I would say, is a photo of a traffic situation. But actually, it is not. You know that thing full self-driving facilities in cars. Any automobile manufacturer is trying to build up self-driving facilities because that's the next huge thing in automotive. How they are doing that? They are building cameras into the car. They are building LiDAR sensors in it. They are putting a computer in front or in the back of the car, a huge computer, and then they do some machine learning, and then they can say, is this a good or a bad traffic situation? If it's a good one, just go. If it's a bad one, you should stop. The problem is not building all this. That's easy. Actually, it's very easy mounting a camera on a car. That's no problem at all. The problem is the machine learning behind that, the training data. Because imagine, to do machine learning, you need to have valid and good training data. Where does it come from? Typically, we would say somebody has to make pictures and videos and annotate them. Yeah, we can make a picture of a traffic light. It can be red and green. We can train a machine learning model to detect the red and the green light. Fine. We can make a picture of a tree and train the model not to drive into it, because we assume that this is not a good idea. We can make a picture of a small tree, a medium tree, a large tree. You see where that goes? And what happens if a kid jumps in front of the car? Yeah, we can make a picture of that as well. But is this something we should do? Should we use real-world kids to train machine learning models for dangerous traffic situations? I don't think so. And even if we would, you could go to an elementary school, pick a bunch of kids and say, jump in front of the car and make a picture. But then you have 20 of them. But for machine learning, we need 20,000 or even millions of such pictures. So, and here, this thing comes in place. This is taken from NVIDIA DriveSim. DriveSim is a virtual twin for traffic simulation by NVIDIA. Yes, they are everywhere currently. We know that. But to be honest, they're doing a great job. So this is DriveSim. What they do is they have a complete virtual world, a digital twin, to simulate any traffic situation possible. You can simulate a kid jumping in front of the car in summer, in winter, when it's raining, when it's bright sunny, when it's dark outside, the kid wears a base cap or wears I don't know what. You can simulate all of that. And what NVIDIA does, it creates training data in high resolution, perfectly rendered, not distinguishable between the real world and the simulation. And with this set of training data, all the manufacturers do their full self-service driving training. This is the point. And what is important here, and why is it important for this session? This is a virtual world. And to evaluate the results of machine learning, you need to identify the objects that have been connected here. You need to know how far has the other car been away when we started stopping, for example. And NVIDIA does not just nice rendering. They have a physics engine in there where you can calculate velocities, distances, and all that stuff, so you get perfectly annotated training data, simulated in a virtual world. This is another example. A machine currently built up by Siemens in the NVIDIA Omniverse. And this, not a machine, a factory, sorry for that. A factory, complete factory, simulated with all the machines in it, all the workflows, all the processing of goods, the production. And it's done virtually because you can easily move parameters. And of course, you need to do identification of machines, because when you have machine-to-machine communication, they need to authenticate against each other in real world and in this simulation. Because only if you have that, you can transfer the knowledge you have from the simulation to the real world. And this is why we are here. So, long story short, the term metaverse is not that thing developed by Meta. It's a meta term, a synonym for all this bunch of virtual technologies, of virtual worlds, of business cases, of digital twins, and the connected problems. So if somebody says, I'm building my own metaverse, he actually means he's building a virtual world, because the metaverse as such is everything which we can represent digitally. So identification is mandatory here, and it has to be unambiguous, and it has to be protectable. So humans, the kangaroo avatar, and devices on the other side need to be identifiable and authenticable. And the reason for this is that we have vendors of virtual worlds on the one hand side, in the industrial, social, or individual area. We need to create public awareness on the other hand side to identify corresponding services, and we have to take care about the legal boundaries and the regulatory aspects of all that stuff. So identification in virtual worlds is a mandatory layer. Anybody that tries to build up such a world has to take care about that. And there are now a bunch of concepts we need to understand to be able to introduce such mechanisms. First of all, we see the layers of identity. They are on the bottom here. And there are 3 layers. The most important layer is the identification. That's who am I? Managing identity and identifying yourself. Built upon that is the data level, creating, collecting, protecting data about me. And this data thing will get a bit of a problem, as we see in 2 slides. So collecting data in virtual worlds is a different thing than collecting data in the real world. It has lots of more layers and properties here. And then we have the representation. That's also different. Representation means I can decide if I look like a kangaroo or a koala bear. I can personally define my representation in this virtual world. And I can have a completely different representation in another virtual world. That makes it a bit complicated. Because in the real world, if I once am able to remember faces, which is very hard for me, but if I would learn that, I could recognize you because I saw you and maybe I know you, and my brain would be able to connect this. In a virtual world, when we switch rooms or worlds, it's a full reset. On the one hand side, you're a kangaroo, on the other, you're a koala bear, or a sunflower, or whatever you want to be. It doesn't even have to be a real object. And that's a problem. So the representation makes things very difficult. And vertically speaking, we have identity types. These are humans. Okay, we know them. Everybody of us has seen some in his life. And we have digital entities. That's kind of complicated because in virtual worlds we typically have chatbots, non-player characters. Those things running around making the virtual world look crowdy, but having actually no sense in it. They are not human. But as you cannot distinguish it, you cannot say if this is a human or if it is a chatbot. Yeah? And combined with the latest AI technologies, this can get really scary. And finally, we have the third vertical, that's digital twins. Digital twins are those digital entities. They are typically not human. So digital entities for manufacturing, for devices, representing machines and so on. So these are the 3 pillars of metaverse identities. And all that is only valid if you know the context where it happens. The context is who am I, who are you, when, where, approved, connected, with which data, in which version, and so on. So all that which happens around of us needs to be integrated in the identification and authentication process. Why is it? When we have digital twins, we actually put them in a certain time, at a certain place, at a certain environment. We want to control this environment. So you can control this multiple times. You can have the same transaction at the very same time in different steps of the simulation. And therefore it's important to know when and where has this taken place. Another thing which is very important is the perception. As I just said, in virtual world, it's not so easy to see whom we are talking with. Let's make a short example. When you're at home on Sunday, somebody knocks at your door, you open it, and your child stays in front of you. And your kid says, "Hey, Dad, my laptop is broken, need a new one." Hey, "Oh, of course, here you have some money, buy whatever you want. Take a MacBook, Mac is cool." So that's sure. You open the door, you see your child, you know your child. You can trust, you should be able to trust your child. And you give money because you have a relationship. That's easy. So we all know those WhatsApp fakes. "Hey, Dad, I lost my phone. Here's my new number." And maybe you even get a deep fake speech message saying, "Hey, I lost my laptop, need some money." Yeah, okay, here it starts getting critical. But what is in a virtual world when a koala bear talks to you and says, "Hi, Dad"? What should we do with that? Would we give him money? If you would, tell me where you are. I'm dressed as a koala bear and step by. No worries. But most probably we would say, "I don't know who you are. Can you prove your identity?" But how can a koala bear prove his identity? Is that even a thing? That's a problem. And that's why we are here. And finally also, the data comes into place, which is completely different in virtual worlds than in real worlds. Here, we see a very interesting result of a research paper 2 years ago. 5 minutes of VR tracking of interaction data in a virtual world. We're not talking about speech or text, we're just talking about movements. So when you enter a virtual world with your Quest or Vision Pro on your face and you just walk around, after 5 minutes, it is possible to identify you with a very high accuracy. This means that this data is there and it can be utilized for good purposes, but also for bad ones. A good purpose could be that with the help of this data, you can support authentication, because that's kind of a digital fingerprint. That's like face IDing your koala bear. But in the bad way, this data can be used to analyze who you are, even if you don't want it. And in many times, we are going to virtual worlds because we like that kind of anonymity there. We don't want to be seen. I want to control what others see about me. And if it's that easy to detect people there, we are having a problem, I would say. And now, let's go a bit more into the solutions. First of all, there's something called the Metaverse identity. And when we are trying to build responsible, inclusive metaverses, places for everybody, with a system of values in it, with ethics, with maybe, whatever you want to put in there. So when we want to build such a thing, we have to be aware that everyone has an identity which is based on the choices you make both online and offline. As I said, the metaverse is not one thing. It's the whole digital world. The sum of all the digital worlds we call metaverse. And for example, when you buy a new car and you register this car with an app, you have a digital element, and this digital element can be something to identify you. The car vendor could do so. And this digital element could also contribute to the metaverse. It's a choice you make in the real world that has an effect in a virtual world. Many fashion vendors currently, if you sell some pair of shoes, you get a virtual pair of shoes to dress your avatar with. Whoever wants to do that. So, but if you do it, you have that direct connection between a real world asset and a digital asset. And that happens all the time. Further, children. Very, very problematic here. We have to protect children that enter such virtual worlds because, of course, we have to protect children anywhere, but in those virtual worlds, nothing can be taken for granted. Children can be chatting with a neatly looking koala bear. Whoever is behind that, we don't want that. So it's important to have a metaverse identity, and these identities will not look like real world identities. They will look, maybe like this. Here I have some overview. On the left-hand side, we have those non-human, completely stylish entity representations. On the right-hand side, we have more human-like looking presentations. But actually, none of that is true, because it's my choice how I want to have my avatar presented. And if I select Mark Zuckerberg as a photo for my avatar, I can do that. But that doesn't make me being Mark Zuckerberg, unfortunately. And that's my choice, and we have to be aware of that. Connected with that, we need to define the type of identity. We have personal identities, which are people that are just like a single player mode, using the virtual world to do their stuff, have fun, enjoy, productivity, whatever. It's just my virtual world. Those people can decide to expose themselves. Then they become public identities. If they are public identities, they can create communities. They become social. And vendors or business or service providers are the professional type of identity. And once you know which kind of identity you have, you can start designing solutions for that. So, what does that mean? The digital ID can have different forms in the metaverse. Therefore, we need an approach to create spaces for transactions, identification, authorization, and authentication. Problem is particularly AI tools for faking identities. We cannot take for granted what we hear or what we see. This also means that in virtual worlds, current techniques like Face ID will have no effect. That's just not possible there. One reason or one solution for this is that we have to start decoupling the identification from the asset. What does that mean? If we have a solution that the identification of Stefan, myself, the real world identification, is linked with all Stefan's avatars, all the kangaroos and koala bears, if we can link that, then we can establish trust. And this linkage is nothing else than a decoupling, because we do not say the avatar has an ID, we say the avatar is linked to a human being having an ID. That's the point here. And we have to support new form factors of digital IDs. We saw that example with the 5 minutes in VR and you're caught. So this is also very important here. And when we almost finally have a look at the digital entities, we see that on the left-hand side, we have virtual entities. And on the right-hand side, we have human-driven entities and all a bunch in between. And it is vitally important that you are able to distinguish if you're talking to an AI or to a bot, chatbot, or to a virtual guardian or whatever, or if you're talking to a human. And why is this important? The key word is accountability. Because digital entities may commit real-world crimes. Whatever they do, it can have effects on the real world. Credit cards, tokens that are stolen in games and so on, that's a real-world crime. And it's done or committed by a digital entity. So we need frameworks for liability for the unambiguously backlinking to the operator and the capturing of actions. That has to be in place if you build up a virtual world. And all digital entities must have a means to disclose whether they are human or AI-driven. For AI-driven digital entities, we have those requirements: transparent, identifiable, labeled, and informative about their capabilities and limitations. And this all, finally, I promise, last slide, brings us to the question, what can we do with all that? Now we see a lot of problems, and of course education and standards is always a topic, but we need a common terminology, common understanding of digital entities, metaverses, and so on. What I proposed, or what I showed you today, is the current state of terminology. And whenever you deal with somebody that is building up a virtual world, use this terminology. Second, digital education and protection of children. Very important point. I mentioned that already. It's fine. But in general, there's one good news. Everything we need to establish that is there. We know how to link IDs. We know how to use combined tokens. We know how to establish trust. That's not a new thing. It's a new thing in metaverses and a new thing in virtual worlds. Maybe a good business model for all of you, maybe depending on what you're doing. So, but basically that's a very big thing, and we know how to do it. And the nice one is the solution can be built by design. This is security by design, nothing else. When you design a metaverse, you do a secure layer in between for the identification, for the authorization and authentication. You select the vendor for your ID management tools and so on. You put it in, and you have designed a secure virtual world. And this is why I was here for. Hopefully you as well. Any questions? Yes, that's right. If we have such vendors providing identification mechanisms, we just have to integrate them in this identification layer. But currently, this is actually not a thing. So we have a lot of virtual worlds that are pure browser-based or app-based or something like that, and they do not include Face ID for authentication. So they have their own user management, their own roles, their own authorizations, and there is no linkage to some real-world known identity management systems. Other questions?
So you mean if we create such a metaverse and new avatars will be established, they should then be linked to a human person in order to be trusted?
Yes.
A trusted avatar in this case.
Currently, the human person is the only thing we can trust for sure. And that means that all the virtual representations of this human need to be somehow linked. And if we don't have that, we cannot trust the virtual world.
And it needs a certificate or something so that I can see that this is a trusted avatar.
Right. Okay. So then, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciated it. Have a good trip back home. If you have further questions, you will find me on LinkedIn or somewhere else. Bye.